The steel walls were sweating. Kapitän Klaus Weber pressed his palm against the cold metal of U-977's hull and felt the tremor of destroyer propellers above. 200 meters of dark water separated them from the surface, and somewhere up there, British warships were hunting. "Kapitän, the oxygen scrubbers are at 60% capacity," reported Oberleutnant Schneider, his voice barely above a whisper. In a submarine, everything was whispered now. The war was over, but the ocean didn't care about surrender. Weber nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the cramped control room. 43 men breathed the same recycled air, their faces pale in the red emergency lighting. The diesel generators had been silent for 18 hours. They were running on batteries, drifting like a ghost beneath the waves. It had been 3 days since the radio message came through. Hitler was dead. Berlin had fallen. Admiral Dönitz had ordered all U-boats to surface and surrender to the nearest Allied forces. 3 days since Weber's world had collapsed into this metal coffin. "How long can we stay down?" Weber asked, though he already knew the answer. 12 hours, maybe 15 if we reduce activity to minimum, Schneider replied. His hands were steady, but his eyes betrayed him. They all knew what surfacing meant. Prison camps, war crimes tribunals. Some of them had families in the Russian zone. Some had no families left at all. Weber moved through the narrow corridor, his boots silent on the rubber matting. The smell hit him first. 43 unwashed bodies, machine oil, stale food, and something else. Fear. It had a smell in enclosed spaces. Sharp, acidic, unmistakable. In the forward torpedo room, 6 men sat on the bunks. They stopped talking when Weber entered. Their silence was heavier than words. "Kapitän," said Obersteuermann Heinrich, the first officer. He was a big man, his head nearly touching the ceiling. Before the war, he had been a boxer. Now he was something else. "The men have been talking." Weber waited. He knew what was coming. "We don't have to surrender," Heinrich continued. His voice was calm, measured, but there was steel beneath it. "We have fuel. We have supplies. We can make it to Argentina. The charts are already plotted. The war is over, Heinrich. The war is over for Germany, not for us." Heinrich stood up, and suddenly the torpedo room felt even smaller. "We surface, we hang. You know what they'll do to U-boat crews, the Nuremberg trials, the Russians, the British revenge for their merchant ships." "We followed orders," Weber said quietly. "Did we?" Heinrich stepped closer. "Every convoy we sank, every ship that went down. You think they'll see us as soldiers? We're pirates to them. Murderers." The other men were watching now. Weber could feel the shift in the room, like a current changing direction. 6 men here, but how many others had Heinrich talked to? How many were already convinced? "Argentina is 14,000 kilometers away," Weber said. "Through Allied-controlled waters, through the Atlantic. It's suicide. Staying is suicide." Heinrich shot back. "Kapitän, I respect you. We all do. But we're not going to prison camps. We're not going to watch our families starve in occupied Germany while we rot in some English jail." Weber looked at each man in turn. Young faces, old eyes. Lehmann, the mechanic, barely 23. Fischer, the radio operator, with a wife and daughter in Hamburg. Kraus, who never talked about what happened on the Eastern Front before he transferred to submarines. "I need to think," Weber said finally. "Think fast," Heinrich replied. "The men are scared. Scared men make bad decisions." Weber made his way back to his cabin, a space barely larger than a closet. He pulled out the last message from Admiral Dönitz, read it again, though he had memorized every word. "All U-boats cease hostilities immediately and surface. Proceed to nearest Allied port and surrender vessel and crew." But there was another paper beneath it, older, creased from being folded and unfolded. A photograph. His wife, Anna, and his daughter, Greta, standing in front of their house in Kiel. The photo was from 1942, before the bombing started, before he stopped receiving letters, before the silence. He didn't know if they were alive. He didn't know if there was anything to go back to. A knock on the doorframe. Schneider entered without waiting for permission. The second officer looked exhausted, his uniform stained with sweat and oil. "You need to hear this," Schneider said. He held up a small notebook. "I've been taking account, quiet conversations, watching who talks to who. And 23 men want to surrender. 18 want to run for Argentina. 2 are undecided." Schneider paused. "The crew is splitting, Kapitän, right down the middle." Weber felt something cold settle in his stomach. A divided crew on a submarine was more dangerous than any depth charge. Heinrich? He's been organizing. Promises of new lives in South America, German communities, no extradition treaties. He's convincing them. "Can we surface tonight? Make a run for the Danish coast?" Schneider shook his head. "Destroyers are still up there. I'm hearing at least 3 distinct propeller signatures. They know we're down here. They're waiting us out." The mathematics of the situation was simple and brutal. They had 12 hours of air. The destroyers could wait for days. If they surfaced, they would be in British custody within minutes. If they stayed down, they would suffocate. If they tried to run, they would be depth-charged into oblivion. "There's another problem," Schneider continued. "Heinrich has been checking the weapons inventory. The small arms locker was opened last night." Weber's blood went cold. "Who has the key?" "Only you and Heinrich. Lock down the weapons, now." "Kapitän, if I try to do that, it might trigger exactly what we're trying to prevent." Weber stood up, his head nearly hitting the overhead pipes. The submarine creaked around them, the hull groaning under pressure. 200 meters of water above, thousands of meters of darkness below. They were suspended in a metal tomb, and the air was slowly turning to poison. "Call all officers to the control room," Weber ordered. "No weapons, just talk." 10 minutes later, they gathered. Weber, Schneider, Heinrich, and 3 other senior officers. The control room crew tried to pretend they weren't listening, but in a submarine, there was no privacy. "Gentlemen," Weber began, "we need to make a decision, together." "We've already made our decision," Heinrich said. "Some of us, anyway." "Then we have a problem," Weber replied. "Because I am still the captain of this vessel, and I am ordering us to surface and surrender." Heinrich's jaw tightened. "With respect, Kapitän, that's a death sentence." "Maybe, maybe not, but it's legal. It's the order from High Command. It's what we swore to do. Follow orders." "We also swore to protect the fatherland," Heinrich countered. "Where was the fatherland when they sent us on suicide missions? Where was honor when they ordered us to sink hospital ships? When they—" "Enough," Weber's voice cut through the tension. "We don't get to choose which orders to follow. That's not how this works." "It's exactly how this works now," Heinrich said. "The chain of command is broken. Germany is divided. There is no fatherland. There's just us in this boat trying to survive." Schneider stepped forward. "If we run, we become pirates. Criminals. We validate everything they say about us." "They're going to say it anyway," said Maschinenrat Richter, the chief engineer. He was older than the others, grey in his beard, burned scars on his hands. "I've been in the Kriegsmarine for 22 years. I know what happens to defeated soldiers, especially submariners." "So we just give up?" Schneider asked. "After everything?" "We surrender with honor," Weber said. "We surface. We show them we're not monsters. We face whatever comes next as men, not as fugitives." Heinrich laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Honor. Kapitän, honor died somewhere around Stalingrad. We're past that now." The submarine lurched slightly. Everyone froze. Above them, the sound of propellers intensified. The destroyers were moving, circling, pinging with their sonar. They were getting closer to pinpointing U-977's position. "Contacts directly above," whispered the sonar operator. 3 ships. They're dropping something." The first depth charge exploded 200 meters away. The sound was like a hammer striking the hull. The lights flickered. Men grabbed onto pipes, railings, anything solid. The submarine shuddered, metal groaning in protest. "They're ranging us," Schneider said, "trying to bracket our position." Another explosion, closer this time. The impact threw men against the walls. A pipe burst, spraying steam. Someone screamed. The emergency lights cast everything in red shadow. "We have to move," Heinrich shouted. "Now, If we stay here, they'll blow us apart. Weber grabbed the intercom. All stations, prepare for evasive maneuvers. Chief, give me everything the batteries have left. Kapitän, if we use the batteries now, we won't have enough power to surface later, Richter called out. One problem at a time. The submarine's electric motors whined to life, pushing them forward through the dark water. Weber ordered a course change, then another, trying to slip out from under the destroyer pattern. But the British were good. They had done this before. They knew how U-boats moved, how they thought, where they would run. 3 more depth charges, closer together now. The explosions were deafening even through the hull and the water. The lights went out completely for 5 seconds, then came back on dimmer than before. A leak opened up in the aft compartment. Men scrambled with patches and wrenches. Air quality dropping, someone reported. Carbon dioxide levels rising. Weber checked the depth gauge. They were at 230 meters now, deeper than they should be. The pressure was immense. Every rivet, every weld, every seam in the hull was being tested. Level off, Weber ordered. Silent running. Cut everything non-essential. The submarine went dark except for a few emergency lights. The motors stopped. They drifted in the current, trying to become invisible. Above them, the destroyer's propellers churned the water, searching, hunting. In the silence, Weber could hear his men breathing. 43 men, 43 sets of lungs, all drawing from the same finite supply of air. He checked his watch. They had been submerged for 19 hours. Maybe 8 hours of breathable air left if they were lucky. Heinrich appeared at his shoulder. This is your decision, Kapitän. You're killing them. I'm trying to save them. By leading them into a cage? Heinrich's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried rage. Look at them. Look at their faces. They're terrified. Not of the depth charges, of what comes after. Weber looked. Heinrich was right. The fear in the control room wasn't about dying in the submarine. It was about living to see what came next. Prison camps, interrogations, families destroyed, futures erased. What's your plan? Weber asked quietly. Really? You think we can outrun the entire British Navy? Make it across the Atlantic on battery power and prayers? We have diesel fuel. We can run on the surface at night. Submerge during the day. Take the long route. Avoid shipping lanes. It's possible. It's madness. It's hope. Heinrich met his eyes. That's more than surrender offers. Another depth charge, further away this time. The British were widening their search pattern. Maybe they were losing the contact. Maybe U-977 had slipped through their net, or maybe they were just being patient. I need to address the crew, Weber said finally. They're waiting for you to lead, Heinrich replied. The question is, where? Weber moved through the submarine, making his way to the galley where most of the off-duty crew had gathered. They looked up as he entered, their faces pale and hollow in the dim light. Boys who had aged into old men over 6 years of war. Listen to me, Weber began. His voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're afraid of. Some of you want to surrender. Some want to run. Some don't know what to want anymore. Silence. Even the submarines seemed to be listening. I can't promise you what happens if we surface. I can't guarantee fair treatment or justice or mercy. The world is angry, and we're wearing the uniform of the defeated. That's the truth. He paused, looking at each face in turn. But I can promise you this. If we run, we become what they say we are. Pirates, criminals, men without honor. We'll spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, hiding, lying about who we were and what we did. Is that freedom? Is that the life you want? Better than a rope, someone muttered. Maybe, Weber acknowledged. Or maybe we face what's coming, together, as a crew, as men who served their country, right or wrong, and who chose to end it with dignity. Dignity doesn't feed my children, said Fischer, the radio operator. Dignity doesn't keep my wife from starving in occupied Germany. No, Weber agreed, but cowardice definitely won't. The words hung in the air. Harsh, but true. Some men flinched. Others nodded slowly. I'm ordering us to surface in 3 hours, Weber continued. We'll transmit our position and surrender to the British. Anyone who can't accept that, I understand, but this is my decision. This is my command. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. We've been underwater for 20 hours. We're tired, scared, and running out of air. That's when men make mistakes. That's when accidents happen, so no one does anything stupid. We're getting out of this alive, one way or another. That's an order. Back in the control room, Schneider was waiting. The destroyers are moving off. Their search pattern is widening. They might have lost us. Or they're making us think that, Weber replied. How much battery power left? Maybe 3 hours at minimum speed. Not enough to run, barely enough to maintain depth control. Weber nodded slowly. The mathematics were clear now. They couldn't run. They couldn't hide. They could only choose how they wanted to end. Start bringing us up, Weber ordered. Slow and steady. 10 meters every 5 minutes. If we're going to do this, we do it right. The submarine began its ascent through the dark water. The pressure decreased gradually, the hull creaking and popping as the metal adjusted. At 100 meters, Weber ordered a stop. They hung there, listening to the ocean above. The sonar operator's voice was tense. Propeller sounds, multiple contacts. They're still up there, Kapitän. Of course they are. Weber picked up the microphone for the ship-wide intercom. All hands, this is the captain. We are preparing to surface. We will do so with our hatches closed and our identification signals ready. We will surrender peacefully and with honor. No weapons will be drawn. No resistance will be offered. We are sailors of the Kriegsmarine, and we will conduct ourselves accordingly. He paused, then added quietly, It has been my privilege to serve with you. Whatever comes next, remember that you did your duty. You survived when others didn't. You stayed human when the world tried to make you into something else. That's worth something. That has to be worth something. He released the microphone button. In the silence that followed, he could hear men crying. Not loud, not obvious, but the sound was there. 6 years of war, ending like this. Not with a battle, not with glory, just ending. 50 meters, Schneider reported. Hold here. Heinrich, I need you to understand something. The first officer turned to face him. His expression was unreadable. If you're going to try something, now is the time, Weber said quietly. Before we surface, before this becomes real. But if you do, you'll have to go through me first. Heinrich stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. I disagree with you, Kapitän. I think you're wrong. I think you're leading these men to their deaths. Maybe. But you're still the captain. Heinrich straightened, came to attention. And I'm still your first officer. We'll do this your way. Weber felt something release in his chest. Not relief exactly. Just acknowledgement. Thank you, Heinrich. Don't thank me yet. We'll see what happens up there. 20 meters, Schneider announced. We're almost at periscope depth. Weber gripped the periscope handles. Raise periscope. The scope slid up with a hiss of hydraulics. Weber pressed his eye to the lens and rotated slowly, scanning the surface. Gray dawn light, rough seas, and there, silhouetted against the rising sun, 3 British destroyers in a triangular formation. They're waiting for us, Weber reported. Full formation. Guns ready. Do we still surface? Schneider asked. Weber thought about the photograph in his cabin. His wife, his daughter, their faces already fading in his memory. He thought about the men behind him, breathing stale air, waiting for his decision. He thought about honor and duty and all the words that were supposed to mean something. Yes, Weber said. We still surface. Blow all ballast tanks. Bring us up. The submarine lurched as compressed air forced water out of the ballast tanks. U-977 rose toward the surface, breaking through the waves with a crash of foam and spray. The hull groaned as it transitioned from underwater pressure to open air. Open the conning tower hatch, Weber ordered. Cold air rushed in, fresh and clean and almost painful after 20 hours of recycled atmosphere. Men gasped, breathing deep, their lungs aching with the sudden influx of oxygen. Weber climbed the ladder to the conning tower. The wind hit him first, then the light. After so long in the red emergency lighting, the gray dawn was almost blinding. He stood on the tower, water streaming off his leather coat, and looked at the destroyers surrounding them. All 3 ships had their guns trained on U-977. On the nearest destroyer, he could see sailors on deck, their weapons ready. A signal light began flashing, Morse code. Schneider appeared beside him, reading the signal. "They're ordering us to remain stationary. They're sending a boarding party." "Acknowledged," Weber said. He looked down at the deck where his crew was beginning to emerge from the hatches, blinking in the light like men coming out of a cave. 43 men who had survived depth charges and convoy battles and 6 years of war. They were alive. That would have to be enough. The British launch approached cautiously, Royal Navy sailors with rifles at the ready. An officer stood in the bow, young, his face hard. "Prepare to be boarded," the British officer called out. "All hands on deck, no weapons, hands visible." Weber's crew complied, moving slowly, carefully. Heinrich stood near the forward hatch, his hands raised, his face empty of expression. Fischer was crying openly. Lehmann just looked tired. The boarding party came aboard, moving quickly and efficiently. They secured the crew, checked them for weapons, began securing the submarine. The British officer approached Weber on the conning tower. "You're the captain?" "Kapitän Klaus Weber, commander of U-977. "The war is over," the British officer said flatly. "I know. Then why didn't you surface 3 days ago?" Weber looked at his crew, at the men who had followed him into the dark and back out again. "We needed time to decide who we wanted to be." The British officer didn't respond to that. He simply gestured to the destroyer. "You and your men will be transferred. The submarine will be taken under tow. You'll be processed as prisoners of war." "What happens then?" "That's above my pay grade." The officer's expression softened slightly. "But for what it's worth, you made the right choice. Surrendering. There are U-boats out there still running. They won't find what they're looking for." Weber nodded. He descended from the conning tower one last time, his boots on the deck of U-977, his submarine, his command. The metal was cold beneath his feet. The ocean stretched in all directions, gray and infinite. They transferred the crew to the destroyer in groups of 10. Weber went last. Tradition demanded it. As he climbed into the launch, he looked back at U-977. The submarine sat low in the water, its gray hull scarred and battered from 6 years of war. It looked small, vulnerable, a metal coffin that had somehow kept them alive. Heinrich sat across from him in the launch. The first officer met his eyes. "Do you think we'll ever forgive ourselves?" Heinrich asked quietly. "For the things we did?" Weber thought about convoy attacks in the Atlantic. Merchant ships sinking, lifeboats burning, men screaming in the oil-slicked water. He thought about following orders, about staying silent, about surviving while others drowned. "No," Weber said honestly. "I don't think we will." "Then what was the point?" "The point," Weber said slowly, watching U-977 recede behind them, "is that we survive long enough to remember, to bear witness, to never let anyone forget what happened. That's the burden we carry now." The launch pulled alongside the destroyer. British sailors helped them aboard, their expressions guarded but not cruel. Weber's crew stood on the deck, grouped together, looking lost in their grey uniforms. A British captain approached, an older man with ribbons on his chest and scars on his hands. "I'm Captain Morrison. Your men will be housed below until we reach port. You'll be fed and given medical attention if needed. You'll be treated according to the Geneva Convention." "Thank you," Weber said. Morrison studied him for a moment. "How many patrols did you complete?" 14. 14. Morrison nodded slowly. "You're one of the lucky ones, then. Most U-boat crews didn't survive past their 3rd patrol." "I don't feel lucky." "No," Morrison agreed. "I don't imagine you do." He gestured to a sailor. "Take them below. Keep them comfortable." As they were led below decks, Weber caught one last glimpse of U-977 through a porthole. The submarine was being secured with tow cables, British sailors swarming over its deck. It looked dead, empty, a ghost ship haunted by the memories of all the things it had done. In the holding area below, his crew gathered around him. 43 men in a space meant for 20. They sat on the floor, on benches, against the walls. Some talked quietly, some stared at nothing, some slept finally, for the first time in days. Heinrich sat down next to Weber. "What do we tell them?" at the trials. "The truth," Weber said. "That's all we have left. The truth is ugly. Yes, but it's ours." Outside, the sun was rising over the Baltic Sea. The destroyers began moving, pulling U-977 behind them like a prize of war. Above deck, British sailors were already examining the submarine, cataloging its weapons, its capabilities, its secrets. Below, in the holding area, Weber closed his eyes. He thought about his wife and daughter, somewhere in occupied Germany. He thought about home, whatever that meant now. He thought about the photograph in his cabin, still on U-977, being towed away into history. They had survived. They had surrendered. They had chosen dignity over flight. Whether that was the right choice, whether it would matter in the end, Weber didn't know. But they were alive. And for men who had spent 6 years in a submarine, hunting and being hunted, dying and surviving, that was something. It had to be something. The destroyer's engines thrummed beneath them, carrying them toward whatever came next. Toward justice or revenge, mercy or punishment, forgiveness or condemnation. Toward the future, whatever it held. And Klaus Weber, Kapitän of U-977, closed his eyes and waited for the darkness to fade into light.